Okay, I think that was the message to get started. And so we'll do that. Just a few preliminary comments. We'll finish House Bill 213 that we started last Friday. Vice Chairman Heiner will be chairing for that because it's my bill and it's inappropriate for me to chair for my own bill. Also, Representative Lawley is now keeping track of clocks and making sure that they do work.
Not true. That was actually Representative Conrad getting me in trouble.
If you happen to watch last Friday's Committee of the Whole, you'll understand that comment. Generally, when someone is new in the chair for the first time, they get all sorts of notes and that sort of thing. It's kind of a rite of passage. So Representative Lawley is now one of us officially. She was given a note that said the clock has stopped, have the chief clerk start it up again, and so she did that.
Yes, she did.
I forget what they did to me. I think they had me straighten the flag, which I actually did. Just for those of you not familiar with that, it's a way to kind of welcome new people. So with that, Mark, would you take the roll, please?
Representative Banks. Representative Conrad. Representative Conrad.
Here.
Representative Heiner. Representative Knapp. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Lawley.
Joyfully here.
Representative Tarver.
Here.
Representative Western.
Here.
Chairman Burkhart.
Here. And for those of you here with us today and on the video, obviously it was either a very short or a very long weekend for some of us. Most of us did not go home. So it's Monday morning and we're all just excited to be here. So as you can tell from the banter. With that, I will turn it over to Representative Heiner to manage House Bill 213.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, we have heard public testimony. We've closed public testimony. What is your pleasure on House Bill 213?
Second.
Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Lawley. Any discussion on the bill before we work it? Yes, Representative Western.
Mr. Vice Chair, and I guess forgive my less than reliable memory, but I think some of the county commissioner folks had raised the concern between where the equipment is stored and where it's installed. And maybe if you could just refresh my memory on what the discussion was, what we concluded on that component of the bill.
Chairman Burkhart, would you like to refresh us on that?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Western, the concern is the wording was not exactly what they felt it should be from the county commissioners. They wanted to make sure that this applies where the sales tax is paid in that county. And so I have an amendment as we discuss the bill that takes their thoughts into consideration, the thoughts of the Department of Revenue that they had also, and I've just combined all of them into one bill. You have a copy of it, I think it was just passed out, of the changes, and then what the actual wording would look like. And when we get to discussing the bill, I can go over those, and I will also have a on-the-fly modification to this amendment I'll go over. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up? Any other discussion about the bill? Seeing none, let's walk through the bill. Page 1, any comments or changes on page 1? Meat of the bill is on page 2. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I would propose an amendment on page 2, and I go through these, but everybody has a copy of them, but mainly for those who are here, if they want to follow along. On page 2, line 1, delete the word as. On page 2, these are all page 2, so I'm just going to indicate the line number. Line 3, delete inventory, and that was a recommendation from the department. They felt that made it confusing because we don't have an inventory tax already. Line 4, after the word property, insert, and this is a little different than what you have in front of you, insert in the county where it will be installed. So cross out is and replace that with will be installed. Line 5, after imposed, delete the words in the and insert by that. Page 2, line 5, after county, delete the rest of the line. Line 13, after energy, insert production. And line 14, delete products, insert equipment. After energy, delete product and insert production. And that is my amendment, if I can get a second. Okay.
Any
And
discussion?
so with that amendment, this takes into consideration the comments made by the Department of Revenue and the County Commissioners Association to clean up the language, make this actually read the way everybody feels it should read, and that's it.
Thank you, Chairman Burkhart. Representative Knapp.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you. Is line, or page 2, line 3 supposed to actually read page 2, line 2 for inventory deletion?
Mr. Vice Chair, yes, my apologies. I did this late at night on the weekend. So, and it was a strange weekend, so yes, it would be that change.
Would that be this also on the next one? Page 2, line 4 is actually page 2, line 3?
Yes, it would be. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Any other discussion on this proposed amendment? Seeing none, I sense you're ready for a question. Question being called. All those in favor of the first amendment as proposed by Chairman Burkhart, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. The amendment as proposed by Chairman Burkhart has been approved. Any other discussion on page 2? Page 3. There's no page 3. Chairman Burkhart, do you have another? Okay.
Mr. Vice Chairman, that was the only amendment we had.
Okay.
It's just a 2-page bill.
All right. Any other discussion? Question being called. This is a roll call vote. Mark, would you? This is a roll call on House Bill 213. Mark, would you call the roll?
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Knapp,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Tarver, Representative Western, Chairman Burkhart,
Aye.
and Vice Chairman Heiner.
Aye.
Ayes are 9, noes are 0. Do pass with amendments.
House Bill 213 has passed committee. Thank you, Chairman Burkhart.
Okay. Thank you,
And
Mr.
I'll
Vice
turn the
Chairman, and
chair
I
over to
will,
you.
I will manage this on the floor and hopefully find a senator to take it on the other side if it gets through. So, and that, with that, I'll take back chairmanship of the committee. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 210, Financial Institution Decriminalization. This is Majority Floor Leader Nyman's bill, and he joins us to explain it. So, Majority Floor Leader, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, committee, for allowing me the opportunity to bring you House Bill 210. I'm not going to pull your leg. This is not a small bill. This is an extremely large, very effectuating bill, but in my mind, I think this is a piece of legislation that we as a state who depend on the extractive industry as our primary source of income that needs to be discussed, debated, and given the opportunity to be able to look at what we can do to push back, in my mind, against a lot of what I will call a woke attempt at trying to undermine our state's ability to be able to generate revenue. We're wrestling right now, ladies and gentlemen, with a windfall in our budget due to an industry that is being quickly and very systematically, in my mind, starved for oxygen. And this is an effort to try to establish and to basically highlight industries, or not industries so much, but institutions that have more of an interest in trying to be woke than shall we say, financially prudent, in my mind. And so, and as a state, we derive our income from this. 54% of our monies that we get for our property taxes come from our extractive industries. And so to me, it is critical to recognize what is afoot. And this is an effort to try to identify maybe players that have less than our best interests at heart, and allow them, once they're on this list, if it would see fit by this committee or the members of the legislature, to enact a piece of legislation like this, but also allow them the latitude to be able to get off that list and to change their ways and to not push back, and to allow us to be able to generate our revenue and to operate on more of what our governor calls an all-in, or a multifaceted ability to be able to generate revenue. So just briefly to go through, start to give you some explanation on the bill. The name of the bill is a financial institution
Majority Floor
discrimination.
Leader? Oh, just a minute.
yes.
So we're going to change the way of doing this bill a little bit, in that I'd like you to walk through the bill. We may have a few questions, but we're going to hold most of our questions, I think, and then have some testimony from the department, the Division of Banking and others, then come back to you for some more detailed questions. Does that work well for you?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Chairman.
for
Thank
the
you.
other people in the room, does that work for you? We will open it up for complete public testimony, but I thought this is a complicated bill, and we may need to hear from our Division of Banking and some others on some of the more finer details and that, and then we can come back with, I know all of us have questions, so proceed, Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If you want to look through the bill, it's an act relating to banks, banking, and finance, authorizing the state treasurer to prepare and maintain a list of financial institutions engaged in discrimination against energy companies, and authorizing the state treasurer to publish that list upon the vote of the Board of Deposits, for specifying requirements for the list and requiring notice to a financial institution before being included on the list, and providing opportunity for that financial institution to be removed from the list, requiring the state treasurer and the state auditor to refuse to enter into banking contract with a financial institution on the list once published, providing definitions and providing for an effective date. What you go through the next part of the bill on page 2 is you're going to be looking at definitions, and we're going to define a banking contract. There has been some discussion in here, and in my opportunity to be able to chat with Patrick Fleming, Mr. Fleming. He believes that there is some work that we can do in here that maybe allow us some latitude, the way this is currently written, because banking services is different than investment. He said, so which would allow us to be able to maybe work within the parameters of this with some amendments or some, for lack of a better word, massaging that might allow some latitude there. Definition of boycott of energy companies means a financial institution that, without a reasonable business or financial purpose, discriminates against an energy company because the company engages in the exploration, production, and it goes down through, and I won't have to read through the entire bill, but what it basically does is it allows for descriptions of companies that are actively boycotting or working against extractive industry, coal, oil, natural gas, and it would allow them to be able then to be identified as such. Moving on to page 4, and you're going to find this in our Wyoming statutes 1310-301, discriminate, and that's used in this bill, and I will read that for you. 1310-301, Romanet 2, says discriminate means to refuse to engage in the trade of any goods or services, refrain from continuing an existing business relationship, terminate an existing business relationship, or otherwise unlawfully discriminate against a person. And that would be the definition that we're going to use to discriminate against our businesses in this particular piece of legislation. And if we want to go down here a little further, and I know Representative Lawley had something signed here, she would maybe prefer that I would also share this with you. A financial institution, and that's under Romanet I of 1310-301, means a payment processor, financial institution as defined in Wyoming Statute 13-1-101, or a national banking association as defined in 12 USC 221. And so that's what we're dealing with here, and that's what we're looking at. Moving on through the bill, you will look down on page 5. It also gives more limiting the liability of a financial institution. Restricting financial institution means a financial institution included in the most recently updated and posted restricted financial institution list. Then this is the list that would be gathered or created by the state treasurer and acted on by that board. Under 13-10-402, a restricted financial institution list, the state treasurer, beginning at line 14 and ending at line 18, the state treasurer shall prepare and maintain a list of financial institutions that are engaged in a boycott of energy companies. The list prepared under this subsection shall be known as the restricted financial institution list. And I have a piece of information here, and I was looking for some information, and it may maybe bring a little bit of clarity to what they're trying to do. Folks, this was a piece of legislation that I picked up from West Virginia. West Virginia, this particular piece of legislation had bipartisan support and passed the state of West Virginia's legislature. And Treasurer Moore is currently engaging in and working with this legislation right now to basically identify those institutions that have an intent or are currently actively boycotting their industry. Wyoming is number 1 in coal. West Virginia is number 2. And so we produce 13 times the amount of energy that we use in our state. We are an exporter. That's what drives our economy. And until something else comes onto the scene to be able to replace that, my attitude in this is we've got to do everything that we can to try to protect our industries. And this is an attempt to do that. This was a statement that was made in an article I picked up off a Utility Drive. It says the firms, in their mind from Treasurer Moore, the firms have 30 days to provide the Treasury with proof they have not turned their back on the coal, oil, and natural gas industries. And that's what this bill makes an effort to do. Moving on to page 6. The only way that this works is you're going to do the state treasurer submit a copy of the list. These are the folks that he's determined that are working and doing this. The President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives will also get a copy of it. And upon affirmative vote, which means that this will have to then be voted on by the Board of Deposits, or in this case, and that was a question that was asked to me. So, well, what is that board? Well, it'd be the State Banking Board. Treasurer shall publicly post it.
Representative,
Yes, sir.
that was one question I will interrupt you for, because we have numerous boards in that, and I think you've already answered it, but I always thought the Board of Deposits was in effect, the SLIB. Am I mistaken? We'll get the banking division up here in just a minute. Thank you. Well, I'll hold that.
No problem. My preference would be that we would allow our state banks to be able to opine on this and to affirmatively vote that. Folks, I want to protect my state banks. I want to make sure Wyoming's banks are in a secure position, that they're being protected. We're talking about institutions on a national scale here that we deal with currently, and what is their intent. My banks in Wyoming have done nothing but do their very best, I believe, to try to support our extractive industries and provide the financing that they need for those banks that actually deal in those types of financial decisions, the best that they can to try to keep our extractive industries moving ahead. So this is something that I would like for them to be able to opine on, unless that would be something we want to amend or do something differently in that. I would certainly be willing to address that, but otherwise, I want this to be handled by our state banks and then relay that and work with our state treasurer. So, okay, moving on down to item D on line 12, it says the state treasurer shall update the restricted financial institution list annually or more often as the treasurer considers necessary and submit the list for approval. And that would be, again, according to subsection B of this section. Notice to the financial institutions, and this is the part in the bill that I think is important, because I'm not just going to, make an effort to try to get rid of you. I want you to give us a good reason why you shouldn't be on this list. And if you are doing things that are working against our extractive industries, that you have the opportunity to change your ways. And I think that's a fair part in this piece of legislation, is that we're not just trying to be mean. We're just trying to be able to say, hey, if you want to change what's going on and show us and provide us an opportunity to where we can confirm that you're not boycotting us and you're working with us, then that's good. And that's why we put a 45 days before including a financial institution on the restricted financial institution list. The state treasurer shall send a written notice to the institution containing the following information: that the state treasurer has determined that the financial institution is a restricted financial institution, and so on. It goes to Romanet 2, that the financial institution will be placed on the restricted list, letting you know that that's what will happen. And this restricted institution list is published in the state treasurer's website. The institution's placement on the list may, in this, render the institution ineligible to enter into or renew banking contracts with the state of Wyoming. And so what I'm trying to do in this, and I've had some that say you're not giving them enough latitude. I've got others that have said, I have a problem with your list, Representative Nyman, or your bill, is that it's too restricted. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you haven't put enough things in here that really should be addressed. He said, you're being a little bit too light on this. But anyway, the point of this is that we're trying to allow these institutions the ability to get it right and to respect our state and their ability to be able to generate revenue. After a restricted financial institution's inclusion on the restricted institution list, the state treasurer shall remove the institution from the list if the institution demonstrates that it has ceased all activity that boycotts energy companies. So you don't have to stay on the list. You can certainly get off the list, but it's only due to your willingness to try to recognize our state's fiduciary responsibility to protect our industries and thereby protecting the dollars that we spend that support our schools and everything else, our highways, our roads, our towns, our counties, everything that we deal with. 1310-404, source of information, and this is kind of interesting because it's not just based on what somebody says, or I think they're doing this. There's determinations here that define that. In determining whether to include a financial institution on the restricted financial institution list, the state treasurer shall consider and may rely upon any of the following: a financial institution's attestation that it is not engaged in a boycott of energy companies. We'll take your word. We'll listen to what you have to say, but we would like to be able to also find fact that would substantiate your offer, your claim. Publicly available statements or information made by the financial institutions, including statements by a member of the financial institution. For example, I read at length a statement made by an institution that we deal with, BlackRock, where they're making open and overt efforts to try to, move away from the extractive industry, fossil fuels, carbon, carbon increasing, as you should say, or whatever, industries. And so when you're making that kind of an overt statement, well, then if you're going to do that, you also need to show us how you're also have a balance and that you're also investing in and not boycotting specifically or exclusively our industries, which we derive our income from. Information published by the state and federal, Romanet 3 on page 9, beginning at line 1, information published by a state or federal government entity. So this is information that's been backed by other governments, entities that have that information. In determining whether to include a financial institution on the restricted financial institution list, the state treasurer shall not rely solely on any of the following information. And this is where we go into, does not have to consider statements or complaints by an energy company. Just because an energy company comes and says, hey, they're not playing fair, they're being mean, we can't rely on exclusively that statement. We have to dig deeper. We have a responsibility to make sure that it's not just a he said, she said. You have to come up with some kind of support. Media reports. Because, and many people have told me, I thought you could believe everything that came out of the media, but we put this in here that says specifically, you might want to double check what the media is feeding you before you go and move ahead, which just says media reports of the financial institutions' boycott of energy companies do not need to be considered. Does not need to be part of the consideration process. Or in C, under heading C, a financial institution may not be compelled to produce or disclose any data or information deemed confidential. Not trying to dig in too deeply here, folks, and we're not wanting you to expose anything you can't do. Privileged or otherwise protected from disclosure by state or federal law. And now we're going to get into page 10, and we're getting down to the tail end of the bill here. The state treasurer and the state auditor shall refuse to enter into a banking contract with a restricted financial institution based on the restricted financial institution's status. Okay, now here's where the heartburn begins. In Wyoming, and as I've studied this and worked through this, the issue we deal with is the sheer volume and size of what we're required to deal with in our, for example, our funds and everything like that. Quoted to me has been that there's transactions in the amount of up to $800 million a day that are actually being transacted right now. And now you're, K-Chip, our representative, now you're taking away our ability to be able to deal with people that are big enough to handle the business that we have to deal with. And that is a real issue. But you know what, as I've thought about that, folks, that also scares me. Because if we're now limited to very few institutions that can handle that, then quite frankly, we are very quickly over a barrel. Because if we don't have options in how we handle our banking, or if we can't look at those things, which hopefully potentially we can, and we get somebody that just decides that it's just not cool anymore to generate money the way you guys do, and you're going to have to do business with us because you don't have options. That bothers me. Because what are we going to do? Do our industries and all the folks and all of our infrastructure and everything we've done just simply say, well, then you can just do whatever you want with us because we can't go anywhere else. And if this conversation doesn't begin now, and we don't start to address this thoughtfully and take a serious look at where we're at, I would dare say that we are over a barrel because of this sheer volume of our dependence on what we do. Let's just be completely honest. Wyoming is, our wealth is in our minerals. Right now, it really is. We are blessed with an extractive industry. You think of Trona, you think of gas, you think, I mean, I think we're number 2 in gas, number 1 in coal. Oil, I think we're number 2 or 3, not sure. Number 7 in oil. We produce 13 times, like I said, the amount of energy that we consume. We export for the security of our nation. And I know people really would love to be able to rely solely on wind and solar and believe that that's the direction we need to go. But the reality of it is, it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And if we are going to quietly and slowly extract the oxygen out of our extractive industries, we do our nation a disservice. And so I ask this committee that you would thoughtfully consider this legislation. I am glad to work with anybody to figure out how we can refine this. This is not a perfect bill. I'm not going to come here and tell you that if you guys start monkeying with this, that it's going to hurt my feelings and could destroy us. It's not. This is a framework to work within and try to figure out how we can address the concerns that we have as a state. We have a very real issue. I was here 2 years ago and we cut $458 million from our budget because an administration come in and decided that maybe this wasn't the best way to generate power and declared war on our industry. I'm wanting us to be in a position where we have the ability to protect ourselves and realize that when the sun rises on the eastern side of this United States, that we don't have to depend on just solar or wind, but we can actually literally physically in this industry turn a dial and provide the load capacity that our nation needs to be sovereign and protect itself and provide for our industries. And if we don't make steps like this to provide that protection for our industries, our nation will suffer. But first, Wyoming's going to suffer, and Wyoming is my first responsibility. And so with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions I possibly could.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. I think with that, I'm going to ask the banking commissioner to come up, and he can bring his people with him. We have 3 more chairs up here if he wants to throw them to the wolves, so to speak. But Majority Floor Leader, I would ask that you stay, and then after Mr. Bishop's presentation, we'll probably have a lot of questions, and hopefully between the 2 of you, you can answer. If that's does that work for both of you? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Bishop, just for the record, identify yourself again. I know this gets monotonous at times, but please, and then proceed.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah Bishop, the State Banking Commissioner and head of the Division of Banking. One of the questions that came up was whether or not the state deposit, board of deposits is the same as the state banking board. It is not. I think you were correct. That is a slip, and that is in Title IX. The state banking board is made up of representatives from banks in Wyoming, one representative from a trust company, and then 2 members at large. And I will say, over their general duties, they don't deal with state contracts as it is now. That might be an important distinction. So I think that's something that may get cleared up. But a few comments I had regarding the bill, definitely have no objection to anything in the bill at all. My main comment was whether or not it actually belongs in Title 13 or whether it should be moved to Title 9. So a little bit of a background, as you know, Division of Banking, we enforce and administer Title 13, which puts requirements onto banks and other financial institutions, and also directs us in how we administer Title 13. I think right now, it looks like the state treasurer and auditor entering contracts for banking services, that's not addressed in Title 13. There's already a section in Title 9 for that section. Title 9, Chapter 4 designates which banks are eligible to provide banking services to the state and hold those public funds. And there are various requirements already in Title IX, Chapter 4 related to when a bank can serve as a depository for state funds. And overall, ultimately, this bill doesn't really put restrictions on banks. It doesn't direct banks to do anything. It doesn't direct us to administer anything with this bill. It really administers the treasurer and auditor in their determination of which banks can hold state funds, which is already, that's already partially built out within Title IX, Chapter 4. So definitely no intention to block this or anything, but I wanted to just make sure everyone was aware of that section of Title IX already exists. But I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Okay, committee, I think with that, I think a lot of us have some questions and I would say just start. Really? Nobody? Okay. Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the bringer of the bill, Representative Nyman. I will share with the committee and also those in attendance that this is a real issue. Specifically, not only does it impact those as denoted engages in exploration, production, et cetera, but it also is having a direct impact upon some businesses in Lyman, Wyoming, on those businesses who actually support these actual units. So whether it be gas production or subcontractors for coal outages, maintenance, overhauls, et cetera, so forth. And a specific case in point is that there was an outfit in Lyman that reached out to me and stated that they're based on their portfolio, which is obviously maintaining services, maintenance contracts for a gas production well, and also producing, or more importantly, providing manpower for overhauls as it relates to the soda ash industries who utilize coal. Their portfolio is not in alliance with their respective banks, and they are refusing the ability to seek funding from them, more support as they expand and so forth and so on. So it's not just our energy impactors or energy producers, it's also those who consume coal power or coal and or natural gas. So it has a broad reaching, and maybe that's one of the topics we can talk about later, is a potential amendment to include and support those who support the coal industry and or natural gas users, specifically based on maintenance contracts, overhauls, et cetera.
Representative, is there a question in there?
There is, Mr. Chairman. I would encourage and more importantly ask if we have the ability, specifically the bringer of the bill, to add those who support the specific the specific coal producers, natural gas, et cetera, so forth.
Representative?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad, and that we can certainly engage in here. When you see on page 3, it talks about that engage in the exploration, production, use, transportation, sale, manufacture fossil base. B, engages, and again, exploration, production, transportation, sale, manufacture, fuel-based. Easily that could be put in there. I mean, that would be without even hardly trying, would be able to provide coverage for those folks as well, because it has anything to do with the restricting the ability of our extractive industries and those folks that depend on those industries to be able to do business. So yes, sir, absolutely. Glad. Thank you for the amendment.
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Representative Nyman, thank you. I think if we could articulate that, that would sure strengthen at least those businesses in Southwest Wyoming that truly make their employment, but also their businesses strive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Bishop, you referred us to Title IX. Could you give me a little more specific citation to where in Title IX you see the requirements in terms of the board and,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director,
I believe
or
it's Title
Commissioner, I'm
IX,
sorry.
Chapter 4.
okay,
I think Title IX, Chapter 4 addresses what financial institutions can hold state funds, and I think that directs the treasurer of kind of who's allowed to be on basically the approved list and hold those funds. I believe that's Chapter 4, Title IX.
I'll follow up.
Follow up.
Thank you for that, because I felt this was a little misplaced also, and again, I really appreciate Floor Leader Nyman bringing this bill. I think it's an extremely important topic for our state, but it really does deserve some attention to focus on, are we doing it in the right way with the right processes? And so I appreciate that reference. And had you, I haven't really looked at Title IX because I was trying to figure out where it would fit. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you see it fitting there more appropriately?
Commissioner?
Yes.
Sorry,
thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm not an expert at Title IX. That's, obviously, I know a lot more about Title 13. However, I do know that Title IX directs the treasurer to select institutions held by state funds. And there are other restrictions put on those financial institutions to basically qualify to hold state funds. I believe that's also already in Chapter 4 of Title IX. And so when I read this bill, it seemed like that was kind of the natural fit because it just adds more items to be considered by the treasurer and the auditor's office before making that determination.
Thank you.
Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Nyman, after this, this deals a lot with our state treasurer and what he can or should be able to do with our state deposits. But after the general election we just had, it changed the investment opportunities and options for our municipalities and counties and some of the other institutions within the state. Would this also apply to our counties and some of their investments as well as our state investments?
Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, it would. I mean, this is what this is going to basically do is it's going to stay, we want to make sure that we're investing with firms that are not working diligently against our industries. Now, as far as on the municipal level or what they're investing in, then probably not. Really, I mean, what we're looking at here are financial institutions that we are investing in as a state that are actively boycotting our industries. And so I don't know how to completely answer your question on that. We've never really got into that. My intent of this was just to try to establish those large institutions that are actively trying to deny funding, refuse lending capacity to these industries, and in so doing, trying to undermine their ability to do business. So.
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Nyman, therefore, it will impact our counties. Do they support this legislation and realize that it will narrow some of the boundaries that they have for financially investing their money?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Heiner, it's a good question, and I have had some feedback from counties. They realize that this could have a financial impact on them because even when you look at how we send back our direct distributions to our counties and our municipalities, this is all contingent upon the monies that we generate here. But it's been interesting, the conversations that I have had with folks is that we realize this is a problem and we realize that we need to do something about it. And one of them actually said to me, he says, if we don't start doing something about it now, it might be painful now, but it's going to be lethal to us later if we don't, was the position that they took. So I think there's folks out there that are scared to death of what the potential implications are of this. There's other folks out there that realize that if we don't make a conscientious effort to try to address these issues that we're dealing with right now as a state and the pressures that are being applied to our industries, that in the long term, it's going to be far more devastating to our state. So I think they're willing to do the work on the front end in an effort to try to protect us from what could happen on the back end.
Okay. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. just a question for the majority floor leader. The state treasurer's office, their goal is to grow the corpus of our state. And do you think this bill could potentially limit their ability as far as investment options for our money?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lawson, without question. I mean, if you're looking at a financial institution that has been investing and then suddenly you're not able to invest with them because of this legislation that is basically they're working against us. But that's the problem. It's a catch-22. And like I say, this is not a small issue. Currently, Wyoming, from all accounts that I am understanding, receives from 25 to 30% of the dollars that we spend from investment income that we are currently generating right now. That has been an effort to try to level out, if you will, our peaks and valleys that we face as a state because of one single administration change can come in here and have a dramatic effect. In my short tenure as a legislator, I've already seen it. And so when it's saddening to watch as we get attacked as a state because of what we produce, because suddenly now we're closing. It just blows my mind. I hate to even get me started on this because I'm watching China build coal-fired power plants at 1 a week, and we're looking for ways to shut ours down when we're sitting here and we can bring it with a conveyor into our plant. But we can still find ways to generate, and they can pay us to send that same coal that we can't burn here now because it's dirty or whatever, which we have the cleanest, best coal in the world. We can ship it to China and allow them to burn it, and we have to shut ours down. That is just, to me, mind-numbing. I actually think sometimes they believe that we all live in a bubble and that our bubble is going to be clean even though they're making a mess. This is one Earth, all in the same place. Everything that's there is going to be here. And so to answer your question, yes, it is going to limit our ability in those respects. But I think ultimately what we're looking at here is if we don't recognize the sheer volume of dollars that this state receives from these industries and work diligently to continue to press forward against this idea that we can't have these energies that are clean. The technology we have in this United States is far beyond anywhere in the world. And we've proven that over and over again. And I am saddened at the idea that we are going to allow, how do you say it, not be mean. I'm saddened that we are allowing interests that do not have the resources or the ability to be able to bring what we have and what we currently have in technology to limit our state and ultimately our nation's ability to protect itself. Our energy is our nation's security, quite frankly. And if we don't stand up to this and say, you know what, well, maybe we can't invest with you because you are simply buying bullets to shoot us with. And if we can do that, then we can start to push back against these companies and say, you know what, we want you to be in business. You know you do a great job. You're working every day to do a better and better job of providing a clean energy. And if we encourage those types of businesses, they're going to recognize that that's where people really are and the value of that. But when we yield to pressure from these folks, we ultimately cut our nose off to spite our face. And so I'm not an all one person. I realize that this has many spokes in it. And I think that if we just all of a sudden say, well, this is no longer any good and we're just going to snuff the life out of it, I think it's irresponsible. I'm all for trying to figure out other ways of developing energy in this state. But to just try to quietly and corporately snuff the oxygen out of this industry is a fool's errand. And I think it's going to ultimately hurt our nation.
Follow up, Representative? Okay, Representative Lawley was next. Vice Chair. Representative Lawley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am complete agreement with the target that you are defining and its importance. My focus is, are we taking a clean shot at this? Or does this bill approach it in a way that actually is kind of around a corner, around this way, and then maybe we hit the target? And so I want to just say this, I have had a chance to look at Title IX, Section 4, and it really begins to unravel some of my concerns in the view of, this is, I believe, a more clear shot. Did you consider, Majority Floor Leader Nyman, putting it under Title IX and sort of organizing it around kind of the concepts there, as opposed to Title 13? Is that something that you kind of worked through, and there's maybe a reason or a response that you didn't choose to do it that way?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lawley, what I did was I took the West Virginia law that was currently had the bipartisan support, and we injected it into our statutes. And I worked through LSO and through the office there to try to put it in the appropriate, and the appropriate was discrimination and the discriminatory practice of trying to withhold or basically withhold or discriminate against funds. And that's where that ended up. I am fully thrilled with the idea of trying to change that and get it under a different title if it's more comprehensive and does a better job of actually doing it. If not, we wrote this right off the West Virginia law in an effort to try to reflect what they were already passing and working with. So I'd rather stay with whatever's going to work. So I don't prefer Dallas via Pittsburgh, if that's your question.
Okay, follow up?
Yes. I think there's a way to do both, and we can talk about that, but discrimination is definitely part of the basis, but the sort of regulatory process and the finding of how the agencies work, I think it fits better under Title IX, and I think it will, again, my issue is really one of, is this as effective as it can be, and does it create a nimbleness of effort? Because I'm well aware through my own experiences in practicing law of the cat and mouse game that gets played in these kind of issues. And so I think we need to take that seriously and try to circumvent some of that a little bit, and how we put it in the statute, how it begins to work with what current way we regulate these matters can make it better, I feel like. So I just say that and ask for you to look at that and consider that.
Okay. Anything, follow up? Okay, Vice Chair Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Majority Floor Leader Nyman, I'm glad we're able to extract blood from you. That's what our intention is here. We focused a lot on the impact this may or may not have on our state treasurer, on our investments, whether it will actually hurt our state financially. I propose something totally opposite from that. Last year, the S&P 500 lost on the, I think, 14 or 15%. It was a bad year. But if you look at the energy sector, the fossil fuel sector, that sector gained 30 to 60% last year. So opening this up and going with investing our funds with someone that is not focused on staying away from fossil fuels, that is open up to other means of investment, could this not actually improve our investments by allowing them to invest in energy, which we have an abundance of, and which is doing very well in a portfolio if we were able to add that to it?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Heiner, that's an incredible point, and we've seen it internationally. We see countries that have been mothballing their coal-fired power plants in Germany now recognizing the need to reinvigorate these plants. I think people are coming to the recognition that coal is here and that it is a necessary component of making sure that we have the energy that we need to do business. Yes, absolutely. I think that what we've seen in such an increase in the dollars that we're seeing now for our natural gas, for our coal, for our oil, is recognition that these industries are vital. They are viable, and they need to be developed, and they need to be supported through the ability of financial institutions to recognize that we need these corporations to continue to do what they're doing. Absolutely. I think diversification, I'm in agriculture. I live on a ranch. That's what we do. Diversification is what helps us to survive. When all of our eggs are in one basket, we live with the peaks and valleys of whether or not that's going to be useful or not. But absolutely, we need to recognize the value there. We need to see what has just happened. And I would hope that these institutions would recognize that and not continue on this, in my mind, an agenda to try to do away with something that we can't really live without. They'll say we
Follow-up?
can't live with it, but in reality, we have to utilize these things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for a state that gets most of its revenue from fossil fuels, what kind of a message would that send to our energy companies if we were willing to invest in energy that develops here within Wyoming and actually increases our portfolio revenue? Would that send a good message to the companies that operate in Wyoming?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What, yes. I think that would be a shot in the arm like they've never known. And that's the thing. I mean, we see a struggle to even look at our energy companies and say, let's give you some opportunity to have some more of your dollars, because to me, it's a philosophical, you have to excuse me, I'm trying to dodge this. It's a philosophical viewpoint that I look at, is that I believe personally that dollars are best kept in the hands of the folks that are producing, because they know best how to spend them. If we can keep dollars in the hands of these companies, there's people out there that got real heartburn over how big and how amazing and how much money they generate. This and those are the companies that are generating the revenue that all the rest of us benefit from. That's just the reality of the way it is. And we need those companies to be successful. And we need them to stay and play. Our state and our nation is dependent on that. All of our services, we're going to go upstairs and start working on a budget, Representative, as you and I both very well know, and all of us know. We're going to be up there trying to decide to do with money to make sure that our seniors are cared for, that our mental health is taken care of, that education is funded, that our streets and our roads and our municipalities are taken care of. When you allow companies the ability to be able to invest in themselves and keep more money in their pocket to continue to invest, we all benefit. Government does not create jobs. People create jobs. Businesses create jobs. People are businesses. And so, yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with you, Representative.
Okay. Other questions? Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, I have a few, and I apologize if we're getting a little into the weeds on this with my questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, you need to be more vocal, Representative.
Go ahead.
No, no. Oh, okay, and interrupt me at any point. So, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, is the intent with this to also include our special purpose depository institutions, what we call speedy banks? Was the idea to include those in this also? Because they're pretty much a virtual bank. That's our cryptocurrency banking process. Was your intent to include those in this bill also?
I guess that, Mr. Chairman, that I guess would not really been broached. This was designed to be able to basically identify institutions that were working diligently to boycott financial support for our extractive industries. Now, if that institution is doing that, then yes, I think you would be on the list. I mean, if you're actively trying to stifle support for or refusing to do business with these folks, then that's your choice. Do whatever you want, but it doesn't mean that I have to do business with you. And so, and I think that would be definitely a part of that. I would have to believe so. Yes, sir.
Okay, so, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, and I'll have a number of questions, and I would ask those in the audience here too. If you have an answer for some of these and have an opinion on them, please write that down. And when you come up for public testimony, please share those with the committee. So a few years ago, we changed some of our banking regulations to make it easier for our small community banks to have state deposits in the bank. People don't realize that at that time, prior to that, most of our local banks could not actually handle state money. It was just too large for them. We did some changing in our statutes to make it easier for them to take state money. In some of our smaller communities, they may only have one small local bank that everyone uses. And they may be the only bank for 50 or 60 miles. would there be a carve out in this that if a bank takes a position of, well, I really don't want to, finance the energy industry, but the community still needs the bank, where that bank could continue to do business with the state for that community, especially for the schools. And that at one time, our community banks could not have the backing to keep on deposit the funds they received from schools. So those funds were going out of state for their banking. So your opinion on those things in this bill, is that something we would need to consider?
Mr. Chairman, I guess as you asked that question, the first thought into my mind, that's where competition comes in. Bank of the West. We just had a discussion this morning with some other legislators. When they came out with their position, they were the only bank in some communities. And people went in and they pulled their money out of there in droves. And that was a concern. To me, that would open up the opportunity for banks that don't have that position to come in and said, hey, we want your business. We'll come in and build a bank. I live in a town of less than 500 people. I have 2 banks. There's a new one being built in my little town right now. And so a branch of that bank. I've got other communities in my district that have multiple banks in small communities. I personally don't know that it would be necessary to try to protect a bank like that. I think that's where we allow capitalism to do its job. And when another bank says, hey, these guys are tripping over themselves and they're making some very poor decisions that the community does not respond to or does not support, I think we need to send somebody over there and set up a bank, because we want to help these people and we want to be the bank that they need to do the job that they're wanting to accomplish. So to me, I think competition will take care of that. And but a lot of times people just need to know what their institution stands for. And in that particular case of Bank of the West, when people found out what was really going on and what they were and were not willing to support, the folks voted. And that made that determination. So I would just, in that case, unless somebody can come up and really give me the riot act on that particular idea, I think let competition take care of itself. Let these banks do what they do well, and that's loan money that they understand and know how to do it.
So Representative, we've talked a lot about banks and banking, but there are numerous other financial institutions out there. And your bill title is Financial Institution Discrimination, but we've talked mostly about banking. Should we expand this, do you think, to include other financial institutions? For example, credit unions, which are very viable for a number of our communities. I know there's always an argument between the banking industry and the credit union industry. We aren't going to get into that here, but
With all due
that's
respect,
probably
Mr. Chairman, I
yes,
can almost feel the
see.
pressure start to build in the room when you mention those two in the same sentence.
I
But
know.
Anyway, that's okay.
However, they both provide viable financial options to the citizens of this state and to our businesses. In disclosure, my daughter is a director at a credit union not in this state. So, and I know there's always that friction, and that we might hear some of that during the interim. But do you intend to apply this to other financial institutions at this time, or just to banks?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that would probably be the discretion as we go forward. That would be the discretion of the folks on this committee or the chamber, if they would see that that was a necessary expansion of this. I guess to me, it's just trying to make sure that we have lending institutions available in our state that are going to support what our state does to try to keep its sovereignty and its ability to generate revenue and take care of its responsibilities. If an expansion into the credit unions would be something that they would want to look at, then I think that would be the pleasure of the committee and the discussion that could be had here with these folks. I mean, that's why we're here. And I really do. I just want to thank all of you for giving this bill air and the ability to create this discussion and get it on the record that this is important to the people of this state and that this is something that needs to be addressed. And this is not, like I said when I started, this is not a perfect solution here by any stretch, but it's a framework. And I know this, and I maybe have said this already, I know that you miss 100% of the things you don't shoot at. And so if we don't actually take this framework and try to make it into something that is really going to be comprehensive And yes, the shell game thing is when you squeeze here and something pops out here, we do need some time to work on this, but I just really am very thankful and appreciative of your willingness, Chairman, to bring this bill up and to give it the air that it needs to get on the record, get out in the open, and the discussion begins so that we can be thoughtful and do something that's going to be to the long-term benefit of our state and our nation. So, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman. But if they want to broaden it,
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Majority Floor Leader Nyman, or not Nyman, Nyman. Right? So in the fiscal note, it says, it's the last sentence, it says, the STO, State Treasurer's Office, indicated it is unknown whether changing financial institutions would require modification of the existing accounting and investment computer operating systems. So my question is, at what point does the cost outweigh the benefits of switching? And would it be a good idea to include a provision in the statute that says, if the cost outweighs the benefits, then the treasurer's office has some sort of leeway to stick with their current operating system people?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lawson, that's a hard question. Appreciate the question, but it would be kind of the inverse too. If like when Representative Heiner said, when he shows that we can actually do a better job of our investments and just allowing our extractive industry to generate the revenue that it can if it's let to do and the prices push that. Is there something the other way that's saying if we're making more money than what we can possibly imagine, does it require that they put more money into the extractive industry? So I think those things kind of take care of themselves. As far as your idea of having a limitation on it, that if it shows that it's going to cost more than it makes us, that would remain to be seen. I don't know how you would, I don't know what the cost would be of implementing this, simply changing a financial institution, that is more balanced in its approach to how it invests, that doesn't actively work against the things that we do here to generate our revenue. I would look for it to actually kind of in the situation of a small bank where they said, we're not going to do business with you anymore and we're going to do a business a certain way. Well, then somebody else comes in and says, we can do it better and we can do a more responsive job of taking care of your needs and we can do a better job of investing your money for you. So that again, I think is, I don't know how I would answer that. I would think that would take care of itself. And so I don't know if it would be necessary to say in there somewhere that, if you drop below a certain level, then you don't need to consider this. I don't know. I wish I could answer that directly for you, sir, but I really can't.
Okay, other questions? Other questions? Okay, I guess it's back to me then. So Majority Floor Leader, we're all familiar on the committee anyway with the issues we had with a credit card processor for the University of Wyoming refusing to process card charges for certain industries. How would you feel about an amendment that includes that in this bill? That not just the banks, and I would consider a credit card processor a financial institution, others might not, but how would you feel about an amendment to include that area of financial dealings in this bill?
Mr. Chairman, I would embrace that. I think that would be a very logical move to make. I think that does fit within this, and I think it does continue to support. And in your situation there, we're talking about firearms. We're talking about people being able to purchase those without any worry about being cited or identified or singled out. Absolutely. I think that would be wonderful, and I would appreciate that amendment, sir.
All right. Other questions? Any committee? Any other questions? Okay. I think with that, and I really don't want to get too far into the weeds because I have some other things here, and I'm looking through my notes. To do this, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you think the Treasurer's Office would need additional personnel, like one person or two? Have you considered that, what they might need to implement this?
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I can't see behind me, but I don't, maybe if the Treasurer's Office is here and has a representative that would like to speak. But in my conversations with the Treasurer's Office, that never did come up as an issue that they felt like as if, when I talked to Treasurer Meyer, that was an issue that it would create a lot more, workload or anything like that. But it would be better if they would to opine on that, because I never heard that in conversations that would create more work or more expense, but they could probably give a more direct answer to that I'm not able to give, so.
So looking, I'm on page 8 of the bill, and we talk in the bill about determining how they've restricted it and how we'll determine that. And we talked mostly about statements and that sort of thing made by these financial institutions. What about the institution that states that, we don't want to invest in companies unless, or do banking with them unless they have an ESG statement, et cetera, and all of that, that then though turn around and their actual performance is that they may be investing heavily in our energy production companies. And that's happened. I can think of a couple financial institutions that have made public statements, but their portfolios don't demonstrate that. In fact, it's just the opposite. They've invested heavily in those companies. How would you address that issue in the bill?
I missed the first part of your question, sir, so I don't mean to.
Okay, no,
drive you crazy,
that's
but Could
fine.
you restate that, please?
So we have, I'm on page 8 where we look at what it takes to determine a company, and it's mostly based on their statements. And my question is, companies make statements, and sometimes just for public impact, for advertising, whatever. But the reality is, those statements aren't much more than their words, and they say, we're not going to invest in, I'm just picking something, in oil companies. And then you look at their portfolio, and they've actually increased their investments in those companies. How would you address that in the bill? Because I base a lot of things I do on performance rather than words. So please.
Mr. Chairman, and I think that's a wonderful question and a good point, but I think that boils down to that financial institution. If you're going to want to deal with our money, what are you afraid of? You're obviously in your portfolio, you're heavily vested in that, then we would love to do business with you. Now, I guess that's a good question. If you're scared enough of them that you need to make that kind of a statement, but you're actually heavily invested in what we support here, courage, I guess. I don't know, that word just comes to my mind. I don't know. I mean, it's just, if you're going to say one thing and do quite the opposite, I struggle with that. I don't know, sir.
Representative Heiner.
Chairman, thank you. On Representative Nyman, on page 6, it says that we will notify, or the Treasurer's Office will notify the institution 45 days before putting them officially on the list. So if they do have a policy about ESG but are actually investing in energy, wouldn't they have an opportunity to respond back to our state treasurer and say, and tell us, oh, by the way, we are investing in energy and maybe some of it right there in your state of Wyoming, so that we could see, they would have a chance to answer it before they actually get officially on the list.
Mr.
Yes.
Majority Floor Leader?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, exactly. And that's why that was written that way, is to give them the ability to be able to come and explain that and say, here's where we're at, this is what we do. Yes, absolutely. That's what that's in there for, is for them to be able to have that dialogue and explain their positions and to make that clear so that we know that who we're dealing with and that they are favorable or supportive of what we do. Yes, sir, absolutely. And that's why that's in the bill.
I think that's the good Vice Chair's message, to remember what you read in the bill. So, I know you did not say that, but I think that was the message. I got that anyway. Okay. All right. I think those were my questions, and the rest really are very much in the weeds. We could always look at them as amendments and that. Any other questions from the committee or the commissioner or for the Majority Floor Leader? Okay.
I do have one.
Yes, Representative Lawley.
And it's to follow up on this discussion we were just having. So in your mind, thank you, Mr. Chairman, by the way, and Majority Floor Leader Nyman, do you care equally about what companies say versus what they do? Or is your idea more to focus on what they do than what they say? Because obviously we all know there's a lot of duplicity there. And, this, in my view, is a lot of virtue signaling, but, so what do you care more about one than the other, or do you think we should be trying to impact both?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, I believe you need to put your money where your mouth is. I think that if you don't, if you're not going to try to actively support these industries and you're actively campaigning and working to undermine them, then I would refrain from doing business with you. It's just the way it is. I mean, if you're scared enough of the folks out there that you're doing this, but I don't want anybody to know that I'm doing this because I know this is where the money's being generated, but I'm trying to be fashionable. I guess that's your deal. But ultimately, if you're actually doing it and you're supporting and you're not restricting, and quite honestly, just if I may, that is the issue that I was contacted by multiple people that said, that's our problem. The ones that are talking about it aren't the ones, he said, the ones that are actually saying that if you are not, or if you are actively engaged in this type of extractive industry or any part of it or distribution or whatever, he says, we're not going to loan you money because we are actively trying to do away with that. And if you want to destroy a business, starve them for money. And they figured that out. And so, and that's the thing that I keep going back to on this is that because of our dependence, lack of a better description, but that's what we have is our dependence on our extractive industries and the value of them and the usefulness and the security in them. It just blows my mind that they're going to go out there and try to figure out a way of stopping that with no real reliable option. And so I guess, I don't know, if you got the courage to get up there and say, we're not going to do this and we're not going to do this, and yet 60% of your portfolio is in this, man, folks, stand up. Couldn't we please just stand up and have some courage and talk about the real facts instead of just being scared?
Yes, follow up, but I do want to make sure we leave plenty of time for public testimony on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I think I hear you say, Floor Leader Nyman, is that it does matter to expose the duplicity there, to the hypocrisy, and to not do so would really limit the effectiveness of what you're wanting to do. Thank you.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, any other comment besides yes to that question? I just want to give you an opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Knapp.
And just to add on, as a co-sponsor of this bill, I'd like to add that the industries themselves have been under tremendous attack. We always label it as a war on coal or war on the energy industry, but it's much deeper than that comment. There's regulations that stifle the industry, taxes, their ability to have cash flow for clean energy, providing scrubbers and things. But one of the most important parts of it is manipulation. And it's manipulation by some people in power to have information go to the public that may not be true. And they do that through education. They do that through culture change. And finally, you see it entering into business. And businesses are part of that too, where they get caught up in that manipulation of the industry. And I think that's why this is important to look at both sides of that, both whether a company promotes the industry openly and how they invest. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Don't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely do 100% agree with that. Yes, sir. And that is the point of this, is that this is so far reaching and so broad, but it has such a dynamic impact. And absolutely, I would agree with that.
Okay, not seeing any other questions, I will open it up to public comment. So we'll do this in the usual order. Any other members of the legislature? I noticed Representative Singh, Representative Baer joined us. Do either of you have anything to say on House Bill 210? Please join us, Representative Baer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and esteemed members of this committee. I have missed this committee since I've left a few weeks ago. It's a great committee. I believe that the discussion that just occurred has been covered, but I do appreciate the words of Representative Knapp. I was just simply going to come up and say that, words make a difference in our society today. And we as a state are making a statement with this kind of legislation. And so to address the words of corporations, I think is very important. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Representative Bear? Okay, thank you, Representative. I do have a question for those in the room, because I want to make sure we are conscious of our time. I know there are a number of people who wish to speak on House Bill 210. Could you just show of hands who would like to speak? Okay, great. Now, I know we have another bill queued up, which is House Bill 239. Is there anyone in here who wishes to speak on House Bill 239, which is the vehicle idling decriminalization bill? Okay, well, Representative, it's your bill. Yeah, obviously you get ability to speak on this. I just wanted to make sure that we could take public comment on that if people have come in from out of town or anything like that. Okay, thank you for the people in the audience. So with that, anyone from the governor's office wishes to comment on the bill? Okay, other state agencies. Come on up. You all look familiar, but remember name and who you represent for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Bill Pilger, General Counsel, State Treasurer's Office.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Committee. I'm Dawn Williams, Deputy State Treasurer.
Okay, so both of you proceed. Whichever one wants to go first. We're friendly. I
Thank you,
think
Mr.
we are.
Chairman. As you indicated, I've been keeping a list. There have been a lot of things discussed this morning. And so it appears we've got it corrected. The Board of Deposits is in fact the 5 elected officials. So that's the equivalent of SLIB. There's been some talk about moving this bill over to Title IX. And generally speaking, we don't have any issue with that. I will say that the bill as written, as drafted, is very limited to restricting the state treasurer and the state auditor from refusing to enter interbanking contracts. But there has also been discussion about speedy banks, credit cards. Those don't fall under the purview of the state treasurer. And so to that end, if the committee intends to expand this bill to cover speedy banks, credit cards, maybe Title IX still does make sense. But I guess the question that raises then is to whether or not it would at that point be appropriate for the state treasurer to continue to send this notice to these companies when the state treasurer really has no oversight or regulation over these other types of entities. So I just throw that out there as this bill appears to potentially be evolving. It's something to kind of keep in the back of our minds. With that, page 5, I'd like to jump to section 402. Subsection A is what we're talking about when the state treasurer shall prepare and maintain a list of these institutions. Subsection B is where I believe we could potentially be a little bit cleaner on some language. The second sentence, the first sentence talks about the state treasurer shall submit a copy of the list of the Board of Deposits, the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives. But on lines 19 through 22, it goes on to say, upon an affirmative vote by the Board of Deposits, the state treasurer shall publicly post a restricted financial institution list on the treasurer's website. I believe the intent is that this approval, and it doesn't say that it says affirmative vote. What happens if the vote, or excuse me, if the motion by the Board of Deposits is to reject the list proposed? If that's the case, the list has now been rejected. However, the language here would still require the treasurer to post the rejected list. I don't think that's really the intent of the language. I think the intent is to have a list that is approved by the board that would then be placed on the website. And so I think it would also be appropriate to change the language in a way that would reflect approval of the list as opposed to just simply an affirmative vote. And then this language also indicates affirmative vote by the board to post a restricted financial institution list on the treasurer's website. Is that affirmative vote for placement on the website, or is it for actual approval of the list of financial institutions on the list? And so again, I think there could be a little bit more clarity in that language to reflect what I believe is the true intent, which is reflected on the following page, page 6, subsection D, lines 8 through 11, where it says the state treasurer shall update the restricted financial list annually or more often as the treasurer considers necessary, and then lines 10, and submit the list for approval according to subsection B of the section. I think that clearly indicates the intent as written is for the Board of Deposits to approve the list that is created by the state treasurer. So again, cleaning up the language on page 5, lines 19 through 22 to more accurately reflect that intent. The other comment that I would like to submit, page 9, lines 13 through 18. So this is section 405, subsection A. The state treasurer and the state auditor shall refuse to enter into a banking contract with a restricted financial institution based on its restricted financial institutional status. Obviously, it includes the term shall. There's no wiggle room. It's not a may. But there also, as discussed earlier, there's no, I'll say, alternative or exception. This puts us in a situation. We have a current custodial bank and a state depository bank. I look back, it took us about a year from the time that we put out an RFP to the time we were actually able to get into execute our contract for our state custodial bank. The state contracting and procurement process is a significantly long one. It takes a long time. When we're basing these, essentially, when we have a mandatory or mandate that says we shall refuse to enter into these contracts, once one of these institutions is on this list, we have no opt-out, we have no alternative. There's only a handful of institutions in the country that can actually handle the amount of money we have. And so either we would have to terminate that contract immediately, or at least not enter into that contract, renew that contract, or having some sort of alternative opt-out provision or language would be preferable. There is some language in a bill in the Senate File 159, that does allow for the state treasurer to essentially, I'll say opt out, but basically the requirements shall not apply to a government entity that determines in writing that the requirements of this section are either inconsistent with the government entity's constitutional or statutory duties related to the issuance, incurrence, or management of the debt and custodial management, borrowing, investment of funds, or if those requirements would prevent the government entity from obtaining the goods or services to be provided in an economically practical manner. So at least that would allow the state treasurer, especially in these situations where our backs are against the wall. We actually have systems in our office that are integrated and relying on the banking systems that are with our custodial bank. This language would allow us to at least make those determinations. So if we can determine that it would be in the best interest of our office to continue banking under this limited situation, because either there are no other alternatives, or it would be significant cost, significant time for us to go elsewhere, we would have that available.
So a quick question. So do you have that suggested change in writing for us? We like that so that we don't have to make these really amendments on the fly.
The most recent one,
Yeah.
I have it here. We can certainly submit that after.
Okay, thank you. Please continue then.
That concludes my comments on the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Proceed.
Thank you. Bill did a great job outlining our concerns about the bill. I think one thing that he forgot to mention was on page 7, or maybe he didn't do this on purpose, but on page 7 on line 12, there is an indication that the institution's placement on the list may render the institution ineligible, but that directly conflicts with that language on page 9 in paragraphs A and B, lines 15 through 23, where it says shall. And so I just point that out. So we would probably defer to the shall. would like to reiterate Bill's comments of the onus that would potentially put on us. I'm not sure what the status is of the ESG statuses of our current custodial and depository banks, but the potential for a huge impact to our office is there, depending on whatever that status is. And to address some of the questions that came up, Bill made the point about the speedy banks and the credit card processing forms that we don't have anything to do with in our office. And I would like to say that while we don't know what the impact will be to our office right now, just to make the list of the financial institutions and the determinations of their ESG status, we think we can do that without additional personnel, but if you keep adding some of the things that you've talked about, that's definitely going to impact our office's ability to keep up with that information. I want to point out just some of the questions that you asked us to keep track of, Mr. Chairman. Credit unions are not public depositories at this point, and so should you add them to the bill, there is no current regulation in our office for them as public depositories. We wouldn't be able to. We have no relationships with those credit unions, and thereby would not be able to effectuate a list the way that you contemplate, I don't believe. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that concludes our comments.
Okay. Representative Larson.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that you were speaking about a potential amendment on page 9, line 18, or lines 15 through 18. I kind of wrote one down here, and I just wanted to know your thoughts on it. So after status on line 18 on page 9, I said, unless the cost of terminating the existing contract with a financial institution would be greater than the monetary benefit. Would that be a favorable amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Representative Larson. I think that would be helpful. I think the other consideration is the time that, other than expense, that you have raised, the time that it results. This is based on ESG policy. A company can change their policy overnight. We can wake up tomorrow, there's a new headline, new statement, policy has changed. So what position does that put us in? If we need to, if we're on the verge of renegotiating a contract or have an RFP, that process again takes a year long. So I would say whether it's expense, I think we need to have some sort of consideration for time. At the end of the day, I think that considering limiting it to expenses maybe not enough, I guess is where I'm going.
Okay. Other questions for the department, for the Treasurer's Office? Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Williams, I think you guys have some really good issues raised with this bill, and I've spoken with the bill sponsor about it, but how do you guys feel about this being moved to a study bill so we can really do a deep dive and make sure that whether it's a year or whatever it be, that we come out with a product that has really clear, concise recommendations that do what we want this bill to do, but also kind of give you guys the breathing room to be included and come up with the criteria to ensure that our investments are being protected as a state. We're getting high quality, top-notch returns on our investments, but also again, putting some of these ESG companies on notice. I mean, do you think that kind of venture would give you guys the ability to take your time and be engaged?
Ms. Williams?
Thank you. Representative Western, we would be supportive of that. I think a study is always, especially when we're dealing with the kinds of money, we can all speculate what the income would be in the event that and also this bill is limited to financial institutions, and much of what you've discussed today is about the companies that we invest in. It's a totally different matter. And so if you are interested in going down that road, then a study is well warranted.
Other questions for the department? Okay, thank you. Okay, any other state agencies? Okay, everybody else, please. Mr. Mayor, come on up.
Members of the committee, Scott Meyer with the Wyoming Bankers Association. I wanted to say that there's a few things that are really important, and probably none of which is any least the fact that the majority floor leader is willing to meet with the bankers at 6 o'clock at night on Friday. So that tells you how serious we are about this. If you'll excuse me 1 minute, I think I left some paper back here. The Wyoming bankers, we don't oppose this bill. But I think that there are some things that we need to think about a little bit. In the language in there that talks about what the treasurer can and can't do and what is prohibited. I think that it really does need to be made. I think we have heard a lot of testimony about what they're doing, how quickly they can make changes, maybe things that they can't do or should do, what have you. But I don't know how that affects, and the way I'm reading the bill is I don't know how that affects the state and local governments. And the comment has been made that some of these communities have but one bank, or maybe there's a couple of, but they're very small, what have you. I would hate to put handcuffs on those communities as to what they do, especially given light of the recent changes in the law that allow communities to do their own investing. I think also the way that this is written and my concern, make sure that we all understand what's going on, that I don't know, one, what kind of contracts we're talking about that the state auditor or the state treasurer have versus any other department, any other of the administrative agencies. You look at it and say, okay, how does this affect that? Because we're only limiting it just to those two. And also, I don't think that the language in there, it's not explicit, but it seems to imply that pension funds are not included. So that may make something that you sit there and, who are we investing with and for what reason? And pension funds are considerably higher than most people would realize. I will make just an editorial, just a thought that Majority Floor Leader Nyman made a comment about coal and about China. We can't even ship the coal to China because of western states, far western states, coastal states that won't allow you to do it. Only because as a practicing attorney, I know about some of those things. My thought is that we need to make this as inclusive as we can, but we also need to remedy or recognize, I guess, the idea that the state treasurer does have limits on what they can and can't do. And I think Majority Leader Nyman has exactly said it right. You know, we're just kind of stuck between a rock and a hard spot between where you are and where you're not. Your local banks, your Wyoming banks, certainly don't oppose this. Your Wyoming banks want to work with them to the extent that they can. Certainly there's going to be local banks that say we don't do oil and gas. We're strictly an agricultural bank. And if that's the case, then the way the bill's written, I think is fine, because that will let that bank be excluded from it. It's the ones that stand up there and say, we have nothing to do with oil and gas or extractive industries. Those are the ones that are problems. But I would like to welcome the other institutions to come out and say, here's what we are doing. I know I have, in my membership, I have several large banks, and some that the state does business with. And they do, some have policies, and some of them are very much pro-extractive industries. So I think this bill gives an opportunity for those banks to say, we're not on your list because. Other than that, those are just some of my general comments. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to stand for those as well.
Any questions for the Banking Association, Mr. Meyer? No, Mr. Meyer, thank you. So anyone else in the room? Others, please, come on up. Is there an issue with the carpet back there? You looked as if there might have been. If there is, we need to get that fixed. I don't need people tripping over it coming up here.
Mr. Chairman, there's an issue with about a plate and 8 screws in my ankle. That's the issue.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure we're not doing anything here to aggravate that.
No, Mr.
If you would both identify yourself for the record, please.
You bet. Bobby Frank, representing Wyoming's credit unions.
I'm Shane Schultz with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, representing Wyoming Credit Unions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to say that the credit unions also were not opposed to the bill. Our credit unions, in fact, I had 2 credit unions that indicated they would welcome the opportunity to demonstrate that they don't belong on the naughty list. At least two of our credit unions were actually chartered by industry in this state, both mining and oil and gas. With that, in its current form, the bill really doesn't affect the credit unions in Wyoming right now. First of all, I would direct you to page 4, line 5, where it defines financial institution, and it refers you to that section of the statute, and that section refers you further to 13.1.101A. And in that definition, it specifically calls out state chartered credit unions. And we do not have a state charter in Wyoming, so all of our credit unions are federally chartered. So our interpretation of that is then we really wouldn't have any impact under current Wyoming law. Having said that, if a state charter later is passed, then obviously any state chartered credit unions would come under this. The other issue that really limits any impact to the credit union is, as you know, and was stated by the Treasurer's Office, credit unions are not recognized public depositories. Although they are capable and willing to accept public funds, the state statute does not allow that. So with that said, the bill really has in its current form minimal impacts on the credit unions. But again, I would reiterate that feedback from our leadership has indicated that they do not have an issue demonstrating that they're not discriminating against industry in this state. A thought as you look through the bill and listen to the questions that were posed is if it moves forward in its current form, maybe it would be advisable to include a rulemaking authority for the state treasurer's office to further define and hash out any of the remaining questions and details. And with that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have nothing.
Mr. Scholes.
I have nothing much more to add to Mrs. Frank's testimony, other than to say, prior to my life now at Brownstein, I was 15 years in the oil and gas industry as an executive working in the legal and government affairs group. And I can tell you access to capital for oil and gas is a real issue. And while there are, I can say there was one bank in Wyoming of which I was involved with some partners trying to secure a loan, actually for assets in Kansas. That bank notified me that they don't lend regarding oil and gas investments, but thankfully there's another bank in Casper that has a oil and gas symbol that does. And they were very good to work with. But one of the challenges I just want to say, as you're grappling with this or as you hear testimony, when you have less and less banks that offer loans or lending into this space, obviously it becomes the less competition. It allows them to potentially charge more or have more onerous terms. And so I think anything that the state can do to flex its muscle on its investments in the opposite way, I welcome. And then also I want to just add in the ESG space, often there's a lot of publicly traded companies that do participate in putting out ESG statements and banks still lend to them. It's just important to note that they put these statements out to recognize all the good work that they've done or are doing. And it's simply just putting it together, I guess, in a report that they get credit for that then people try and lend to them. So I just wanted to reference that. Those comments are not referenced necessarily for the credit unions, but I felt compelled to provide my previous work history's experience as something for the committee.
Questions for Ms. Frank or Mr. Scholes? So, Mr. Scholes, just a question. I think I probably should have asked this of Mr. Meyer when he was up here. If this bill would pass and we have this list of banks that the state will not do business with, we can't control what a private industry does or what they want to do. Do you think that would have an impact on private industry where the banks or say on this naughty list of the state won't do business with them, do you think that will have an impact that then the oil and gas industry, coal industry would also then take that as a sign to not do business with those banks?
I would hope so. I know, I can only speak for my previous CEO that I worked for. I know he would definitely, and I think most executives would look at them with a very serious eye on whether or not they wanted to, continue to do business in some capacity, whether they're handling their employees, accounts where they're distributing their funds out to employees or whatever it may be. But yeah, I think they would.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you to the credit union industry. We appreciate the input
You bet.
very much. So, Mr. Merlin, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Committee. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this legislation. From the members that I represent involved in the agricultural world, keeping a vibrant, reliable source of energy is paramount. We know what's happened when the price of diesel has gone up tremendously, same way with gasoline, but we also use a lot of other chemicals, our fertilizer, some of our pesticides, our herbicides, our petroleum based. Keeping those costs as low as possible is extremely important to keep agriculture as a profitable industry. Trying to be brief, Mr. Chairman, but sitting in firm support of this. This is an important enough topic. We just passed policy in November to support alleviating the effects of using an ESG score to score a business if people do business with them or not. With that, Mr. Chairman, I hope I've made myself plain, and I would sit for any questions, sir.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Moline in the Wyoming Farm Bureau? Mr. Moline, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Don't be shy, because if you are, I'll close public testimony here pretty quick. Please, come on up. If you would identify yourself and your organization for the record, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Keith Riddle, representing the Wyoming Outdoor Council. I'd just like to suggest that in evaluating businesses, lenders, financial institutions, and their ESG policies, that nuances be considered. Whether we like it in Wyoming or not, the underlying goal is decarbonization. And some institutions may have policies that ban doing business with all extractive industries whatsoever, but others may have a little more nuance to it, wherein they want to see a transition through time that considers energy security matters, for example, and keeping energy affordable, but would look to see programs like more aggressive leak detection and repair put in place in methane production and distribution industries. So if you were to look at this as an interim study topic, I think that maybe some of those details could be more thoughtfully considered, and that it might leave a broader array of institutions open to allow more competition and have less financial impact to the state. And then also with the idea of investing the state's funds directly into the oil and gas industry, I would just note that, in general in investing, I believe the goal is diversification, and we're already heavily concentrated as a state in the oil and gas and coal severance taxes. So as we all know, it's highly cyclical, and I believe investing our funds in development would further concentrate so that on the down cycles, we would be in a worse place. So I just suggest that that be kept in mind before considering that idea. Thank you. Questions?
Questions for the Wyoming Outdoor Council? Committee, any questions? Mr. Riddle, thank you. Okay. Mr. Raymond, come on up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Reeman here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Wanted to just respond to Representative Heiner's question about local governments, or at least counties. We're certainly interested in this topic, and I think generally aligned with the direction of this legislation and what is here. In fact, as I've heard referenced here, Bank of the West was certainly a consideration that many of the counties went through with their accounts several years ago, and we worked very closely with the state board, State Loan and Investment Board around that particular topic. We're only monitoring this bill at this point in time, largely because there's only one reference to political subdivisions in the bill, and it's a little unclear to us what that ultimately means. Is that banking contracts that we would fall under relative to the state's contracts, or if it's specific to the county contracts that they have in place. So we're certainly interested in continuing to follow this wherever it might go. And certainly as it relates to investments, because many counties do have investments out there, if this heads in that direction, we'd be even more intrigued to be a part of that conversation and make sure that it is structured appropriately so that we don't put anybody in harm's way. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions, but appreciate your consideration.
Questions for the County Commissioners Association? Any questions? Okay, Mr. Raymond, thank you. Okay, anyone else wish to speak on this bill? One last time. Come on up. Seeing no one, I will close public testimony. So committee, pleasure on House Bill 210, Financial Institution Discrimination. Committee? Okay, seeing no motion.
Just for discussion.
Okay, if there is any discussion, let's just do the discussion.
I think that, I think just kind of listening to the testimony, there's a lot of, Mr. Chairman, listening to the testimony, there's a lot of folks who agree the consensus is on what the bill is getting at. I think that that's pretty much 100% consensus there. I think that there's just some discrepancies or differing opinions on the language that's in it. And I've spoken with the bill sponsor prior to of maybe amending this into a study bill, which it probably would require just a substitute bill, which of course is in the committee's authority. It might be worthy just because it's going to require a lot of language of maybe delaying consideration maybe till next, I guess till Wednesday, and working with the sponsor to come up with what that amendment exactly would look like to get the wording down. I think that could be a potential option to move this forward and make sure that it does what we want it to do and have a good, a well-worded substitute bill.
Okay, other comments? So I think Representative Western, we may be way beyond just a substitute bill on this. I think there's been a lot of testimony, there's a lot of work on it. I think this bill is extremely important. So the bill not having been moved, it would be indefinitely postponed, but what I would prefer to do with this is to bring this bill as an interim topic rather than just a study, that the committee would take up this item for the interim with the intent of generating a committee bill on this in the interim. And if that's agreeable to everyone on the committee, Representative Western, I generally oppose studies because we tend to study stuff to death. I would much prefer that we take action on the bill, being that we consider it, this whole concept, this whole topic during the interim, and move forward potentially with a committee bill.
Sure.
Does that meet your concept?
Mr. Chairman, for me personally, I think it's kind of one and the same, where it's two different ways to get the same thing. Is is the sponsor okay? All right.
Okay, Representative Lawley, comment?
Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate and really support strongly this being an interim topic. I think we've seen today some testimony that to be more comprehensive, it may even involve more than one bill, interacting with different parts of the Wyoming statutory scheme to be comprehensive. And it is an important topic and therefore worthy of this time that we're going to take to do it right.
All right, thank you, Representative. Okay, so Mark, you have that. The bill was not motioned, but you put it on the list. This will be an interim topic for us to be recommended to Management Council when we do interim topics, which I think is very appropriate. I would ask all of the committee, we've all made copious notes on this bill. There was plenty of testimony that we keep those notes, keep that information for the interim. And we'll take this up then with that intention of looking at a potential committee bill, which is well worked, well vetted, beat up, rebuilt, and how we do our things in the interim. And this comes out as a fantastic bill. And Majority Floor Leader Nyman, I would ask that you keep that in mind and participate with the committee on this as we move forward. There'll be plenty of notice on committee meetings, and if that's all acceptable to you.
Mr. Chairman, that's wonderful. I appreciate that. I appreciate the committee's consideration on this. And this is, I mean, I realized that when I drafted this bill and put it in there, that this was not something that was probably gonna just be taken care of and just dispensed out immediately. This is a far-reaching, very comprehensive issue that needs to be dealt with some time and effort. And so I appreciate that position, Mr. Chairman, and I fully support you in that. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity and look forward to working with you and the rest of the committee on it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. And I want to say, I think Representative Lawley got it too. We may be looking at multiple bills. We may find this easier to kind of divide the subject to conquer it. I think taking all these issues into consideration, we may have a 200 or 300 page bill, which it just becomes almost unworkable. We'll do this. We'll eat the elephant one bite at a time on this. So I think with that committee, I'm looking at the clock. Representative Singh, thank you for your extreme patience with this committee. I will tell you this, you will be up first on Wednesday. How's that work? Okay, we won't put you in after some of these more detailed discussions, but we'll have you up first on Wednesday. If the committee goes along with that, we just take these in order. And I will kind of reject my chairman's prerogative, and my own bill will fall second. So does that work? Okay, with that committee, we are adjourned a little early because I've been told about being late to the floor numerous times. So with that, we are adjourned. Representative Heiner, you'll need to sign off on